Okay, today my guest is Professor Kazuhiro Asakawa. I'll keep my introduction short to maximize our time with him. In the next 30 minutes or so, we'll talk about Kaz as a person. Professor Asakawa is a thought leader and an esteemed scholar, and finally as a mentor to many PhD students and junior faculty. For the sake of time, I'll skip many of his accomplishments and give you a very quick snapshot. Professor Asakawa is an AIB fellow. His research interest lies in the areas of global innovation and global R&D management of M&Es, and his research appeared in many of our top journals. In 2021, he was elected Vice President Program for AIB. He was an Associate Editor for Global Strategy Journal and a Senior Editor for Asia Pacific Journal of Management. He's a consulting editor for Journal of International Management and sits in the editorial boards of many leading journals. Kaz served AIB as a track chair for the AIB annual meetings and as a teaching roundtable chair. He also served AIB Japan chapter chair and chaired the Temple AIB Best Paper Selection Committee. He was also president of Japan Academy of Multinational Enterprises. Thank you, Kaz, for joining us.
Thank you, Igas, for invitation. It's a great honor.
Thanks. First question, what did you want to become when you were a child?
When I was a child, I want to become a musician. And I was really interested in classical music. So as a fantasy, as a little boy, I want to become a conductor of orchestra because I was listening to all the musics since I was young, and I listened to radios and kept listening to many classical music since I was young. And I was really addicted to that. So I listened to so many times until the machine broke down.
Do you play an instrument?
Yes, I practiced piano. So I took lessons, and then I also enjoyed playing the piano. But for some reason, I like more the instrument, orchestra music, because orchestra produces magical sound. The piano is great. It's an instrument. This is the instrument I practice, but I loved it. I like piano music. I play chamber music myself as a hobby, but orchestra is something special. So I always like orchestra music. So that's why I want to become conductor. It's a kind of a stupid idea. It's embarrassing to confess, but that was my dream as a boy.
Interesting. So can you pinpoint the earliest moment of awareness between domestic versus foreign for you?
So this is something related to what I have said a while ago. Because of my interest in Western music, I was really interested in different sounds, the French sounds, German sounds, Russian sounds. Whenever I listen to classical music, Russian sounds very different. So of course, the composers' differences and also the performance differences and how the orchestra sound different. So I listened to many performances by different orchestras. Right? I started comparing them. The same piece played by German orchestra, French orchestra, etc. And I found it more interesting to see the difference across nations. And also, I went to many concerts in Japan. And obviously, the Japanese music sounds so different from the Western performances. I started wondering why these sound so different. So this is my first encounter to domestic versus foreign came from out of my hobby, which is music, because music was a big thing for me when I was a child.
Interesting. This is actually quite fascinating. I never thought about it, but yeah. How did you choose scholarship, and how did you choose to be an IB scholar?
Well, I was always interested in international things. And in my undergrad studies, I majored international political economy. And I studied international relations, transnationalism, political interdependence, and the linkage between economics and politics. But I wasn't interested in business in those days. My first encounter to international business was when I did my MBA in '89. And that was the year when the Bartlett and Goshal's Managing Across Border has been published. And I was lucky to study with Nitin Noria, and he was a professor, young professor there. And actually, I was at HBS, and I started my MBA in 1989, and the book has been published there. And I read the book with great interest, and I studied with Nitin, and I started the independent research project with Nitin and Phil Rosenzweig about multinational management. That was my first encounter to MNC studies, but it was master's level. And more seriously, at INSEAD later on, I was doing my PhD at INSEAD, and initially I was doing research on organizational innovation, organizational creativities and innovations, and in OB areas. And in OB department, I was working with Professor Mike Grimm, who's been supervising me in these areas. And as I was working on these issues, organizational innovation and creativities, I became more and more interested in international dimension of it. And in my third year in my PhD program, I was fortunate to be able to join IBDO's new research project on metanational management. And then metanational management was a project on new wave of multinational companies active in a global and open innovation. And most of the companies in our studies are among the Western companies, European MNCs and American MNCs, who are already cosmopolitan, very geocentric kind of MNCs. So they're very good at engaging a global and open innovation, orchestrating knowledge. But I wondered, what if these concepts apply to the most domestic, ethnocentric, homogeneous, nationally driven multinationals, such as Japanese companies? So I started looking at how the Japanese companies, arguably the most domestic, ethnocentric MNCs, can implement metanational innovation. So I was studying this kind of, so that became my PhD thesis. So that's how I became IB scholar.
Interesting. This was fascinating. Something that is not on your CV that people might find interesting about you.
Well, my CV started from my PhD days, right? So nothing is written before PhD. And then apart from the music things that I just told you, another things I'd like to mention is that I went to two high schools, one in the US and one in Japan. And I graduated from two high schools, one in the US and one in Japan. So I was exposed to totally different teaching styles and students' lives, and the classrooms discussion, classrooms dynamics, and friendship, and extracurricular activities, and all kinds of things. So I was amazed by the difference, the US life and Japanese life, and then I fell in love with American lifestyle. And then I really liked the America as a nation and the people over there. So I was fascinated. And also I was fascinated by the differences between these two countries. So that is a kind of my eye-opening experiences that led me to study international phenomena.
It's quite interesting, actually. In your life, you got a lot of comparative studies. I mean, you're basically naturally doing comparative studies since you were a child.
Right.
Well,
yes, that's right. I never thought about that. Right. Because, I started comparing different composers and start comparing the same music played by different musicians, etc. Yes, that's right. And then I compared educational system in US and Japan. Exactly.
If you didn't become a scholar, what would you do? What would be the second best career path for you?
Okay. If I'm allowed to go back to my college days, I was studying political economy, but then I would probably switch my major to music. And then I would probably study music as an academic field, because I never studied music as an academic field. I love music as a hobby, but I never studied musicology. But I keep thinking about it. Even today, I'm a great fan of music. So ideally, if I could, I'd like to start another life studying music. And then I even pursue a PhD in musicology and probably become a professor of music. And well, it's too late for me to become a professional player. But I guess it's still okay to become an analyst of music.
True. Now, a regret question. What is one thing that you wish you would have done or done differently? Or do you have any regrets in life? I mean, you mentioned a couple of things, but technically, there are some people who have no regrets in life. There are some people who always have regrets. They wish I had done. What kind of a person are you? What kind of?
I have many regrets. I am someone who has lots of regrets. But I think, among many things, the one, I think, a regret that I think a lot even today is that the decision I've made to go back to Japan right after my PhD. And finishing my PhD, I returned to Japan because I've been out of Japan for many, many years. So I thought it's about time for me to go back to Japan. But I thought, in retrospect, maybe I returned to Japan too soon because I missed the opportunity to have international teaching experiences, research experiences, and I missed the opportunity to be exposed to the real mainstream IB scholarship. If I were to go to the United States to get a job in America, and I could be immersed into the North American research paradigms, I'm sure I would have become far better academics in international business. And I think I would have been much more international scholar. I think because I returned to Japan too soon, I'm too Japanese. And I'm afraid I feel I'm not international enough. So this is something I regret.
I mean, it's different. You're training at INSEAD, you're training at HBS. So it's quite interesting. Okay. What are you most proud of?
Well, in connection with what I have just said, in spite of my returning back home, I didn't disappear. I guess I didn't disappear from the world. Well, contrary to all the expectation, a lot of my friends and colleagues jokingly said, "Hey, Kaz, if you go back to Japan, you're going to disappear." Because everybody says, well, Japan is disconnected academically from the rest of the world in terms of research style and policies. And so knowing that, I was really, aware of this risk. So I was determined not to disappear even after going back to Japan. And then so that's why I decided to attend to every single conference, international conferences, AIB and AOM and SMS, every single years in the past 25 years or 30 years. And I tried to commit myself to the international academic communities. At the same time, I was really ingrained in the local academic networks. So in a way, I did both. I was really integrated in the local academic communities on the one hand, and also I stayed connected to the international academic networks like the AIB. And I think it was it because, it took some time. It wasn't efficient because you had to do two things at the same time. But, in the long run, I think it paid off because, I could learn two completely different academic styles at the same time. I think I came to like, although I said I regretted going back to Japan too soon, right now I feel that, I really enjoy my Japanese academic life here because, academic community in Japan is so great. It's so different from the United States or the rest of the world, but, it's so uniquely Japanese, but I think it has a lot of values in it. So that's why I survived in both worlds. So that's something I feel proud of.
I mean, I will come to this in the advice section too. For example, what kind of advice would you give to your PhD students about where to pursue their academic studies, whether they should remain in Japan or get to the US style or the European. They're different. European style is different than American style.
Very different.
Definitely. So let's go to research. Let's talk about your research. How do you explain your research to people who don't read scholarly work regularly? Like you're stranded on the side of the road, you go to a pub, you try to explain who you are, what you do for a living, and why your things that you do. Why is it important? How do you explain that to people?
Well, I think that, I use the word innovation because everybody knows innovation, right? So I study on how do companies generate innovation, but not locally, but globally, because I work on global innovation management. So I say that then how do companies generate innovations in global settings? And I said, why is it important? Because, doing innovation locally is probably not that difficult because you and I sit together next to each other and share ideas, generate ideas, like sharing tacit knowledge, brainstorming face-to-face. I think it's easier, right? But, by sitting next to each other all the time is not really advancing knowledge because you need fresh ideas. And so that's why you have to talk to the individuals far away from you, right, to gain new insights. But if you engage in innovations in a global settings, I think it incurs a lot of cost. It's costly, it's difficult. And you have to figure out a way to manage that, right? So the challenge is how to maximize the potential benefit of engaging in global innovations while minimizing the potential risks and costs. So this is something I'm working on, and usually the people understand.
Sure. Looking back at things that we have done in IB, in your opinion, what are some of the things that need more work on, things that we have omitted, things that we understudied in IB?
Yes. Among many things that, my own take is that I think how question needs further attention, which is process element of IB research. And a lot of studies have been done in causalities and asking why, what factors and what influences, it's about causalities and determinants and then relatively little attention has been paid to how question. How do managers manage MNCs, multinational corporations, effectively? And if I look back to the old days in late 80s and early 90s when I was still doing my PhDs at INSEAD, and there a whole group of the stellar thought leaders who have been working on this on MNC process, like Samantha Ghoshal, Ibdos, and Chris Bartlett, Elena Westney, John Stofford, Gunnar Hedlund, Udo Zanders. These great minds have been working on the process management of MNCs. And this is a great line of research. I call them MNC process school, although there's no such school, right? Like Uppsala schools. I just always thought of them as an MNC process school. But if you look at in the current IB research right now, I think I don't see that much efforts in that MNC process management. And I think I think we need to go back to this MNC process research traditions more. And shed light on this in the new context.
Interesting. About creative research, creativity in scholarly research. I want to ask you about this process. In a state of idle curiosity, a person's mind thinks about new things, interesting things. How does the process work for you?
Okay, first of all, if I'm sitting alone in a deserted island or something, I don't think much idea comes out. So to me, I usually come up with some interesting ideas when I'm doing the following. I think in the crossing the boundaries. I think if I put myself in multiple context and go back and forth. So in my case, like a Japanese academia and international academias, and go back and forth, attending the local conference and international conferences and discussing in local people and global people and interacting with them. I think it's putting myself in different context and, me being immersed with different contexts. I think this is one way to inspire myself. And another thing is, of course, that also includes language. Whenever I'm writing things in English and I'm stuck, I switch my language to Japanese. Japanese is completely different, right? Linguistically different. So whenever I start writing something in Japanese, brilliant ideas comes out. Wow, it's a miracle. When I was writing English, I'm stuck. When I start writing something in Japanese, I think new idea comes. So different context helps a great deal. Another thing is the dialogue. I think I really enjoy talking to many people. Like when I was a student advisor, and I was talking with the executive, the managers, and talking with even students. Students are a great source of inspiration, especially when I'm teaching cases. I only teach cases in the business school. Whenever I teach cases, and I don't know, it's not the students' information, what student says, no. During the discussion between students and myself, the idea comes out. So while teaching facilitated case discussions, I jot down ideas. So, interactions, dialogue is another source of idea and inspiration.
Super interesting. You just said a couple of interesting things. So you're more productive thinking or writing in Japanese, and you then translate them to English, or you have two separate lives. You have a British or English speaking research and then Japanese speaking research.
Interesting. Well, actually, completely different, because I don't write academic stuff in Japanese. I write essays and columns and textbooks in Japanese. And I mostly publish academic stuff in English. So it's a different. And so because of my training in PhDs, and I don't write academic stuff in Japanese.
No, I've been trying to figure out something that one of my co-authors said. I'm working with Joe Mahoney on a paper, and he read one of the manuscripts, and he said, "Ilkaz, you have a lot of verbs here, and you don't have enough nouns." And I never had that comment before. I never understood. And I'm still thinking, I was thinking when you were talking about Japanese versus English, that was interesting. Okay. About the next 5 to 10 years of IB fields, what are some of the big questions that we should be asking, that we should be thinking about?
Yes, there are many actually, but I think the one, if I were to choose one, I think the most imminent one is to re-examine all kinds of conventional wisdom that we have accumulated over the past several decades in IB field in the new context. The new context is obviously different from the earlier context, because in all the management IB conventional wisdoms are mostly developed in the era of a borderless economy, a transnational economy. And nowadays, I think that the world is changing into more divided and I think fragmented, politicized, and a surge of nationalism, and the borderless world is now replaced by the borderful world. I think it's more a rebordering world. And so how do managers manage transnational corporations in the era of borderful economy? So this is, this provides you with lots of opportunities to overhaul, redefine the kind of conventional wisdom we have already generated in the past several decades. So I encourage younger students to really look at this. what are the impact of the divided economies and fragmentations and politicizations, nationalisms on the transnational management. And of course, digitalization is also another issues. But these new emerging context that may redefine the the efficient and effective management of multinational corporations.
Thank you. I'm curious about what you think about interdisciplinary research versus multidisciplinary research in IB.
Yes, I would say that the IB is full of scholars, populated by the scholars from different disciplinary background already. So it's already multidisciplinary field, but I don't see much interdisciplinary collaboration. For example, a lot of efforts has been done in eclectic ways because the researchers draw on insights from different disciplines, writing papers, innovations. In my case, I work on global innovation. I draw on literatures from political economy and the economic geographies, sociologies and psychologies and strategies and technology innovation management, eclectically. But it's not interdisciplinary research. I think it's an eclectic treatment of different disciplines needs to be upgraded to the real interdisciplinary collaborations. We need to work on the same global innovation among political scientists, economists, and geographers, and sociologists, and business strategists. I think that needs to be done. And I think there's a soil at AIB because the community is really diverse and full of the people, experts from different disciplines. I think we can do it. We need to do more.
So about not the progress, but the evolution of the field from where it was 40, 50 years ago to today. Is this a fruitful evolution, or are we losing something along the way?
Well, it's both fruitful and maybe not. I think fruitful because I think it enhanced rigor in the past 20, 30 years because the world is research style has been converging. I think several decades ago it was really different continents and different worlds are adapting different kinds of research style. And I think now I would say that homogenizations of research styles into the North American paradigm, I think empirical rigor is going on, and I think it's good because if that is going on, I think the level of empirical rigor is enhanced, which is a good thing. At the same time, I think if you do this excessively, you are going to miss a lot of complexities of the international business problems because IB is a complex problem. The IB scholars have to tackle complex problem. And if the IB issue is complex, the group of IB scholars needs to be equipped with the same level of complexity. So I would say that a group of IB scholars needs to be more tolerant to different research styles. Just as the world of IB as phenomena is so complex. So I think, luckily, I think the AIB as a community is getting diverse, more and more diverse, more open, and so we can do it. I think we need to be far more tolerant and open-minded to different research style. For example, I'm currently based in Japan, and Japan, in a way, is a final frontier among the developed economies, developed countries when it comes to research methodology, because Japan preserves its indigenous research style. Japan is the last final frontiers, I think least influenced by the westernization of research method. Japanese scholars still keeps the research topic which they are really passionate about, and they choose the research topic out of their motivation, interest, not because of the ease of publications. And also they use a much more qualitative method and descriptive studies, and they do research on what they believe in. So this is exciting things, right? And I think world is complicated, and then there are lots of problems specific to that part of the world, because Japan has the Japanese specific problems, IB issues, indigenous research topics that needs to be tackled by somebody. And I think Japanese IB scholars are tackling that kind of indigenous IB problem in their own style. So I think diversity, heterogeneity in research approach is appreciated. I think, so that's why homogenization, convergence of research methodologies and research studies are valued, that enhance robustness and rigor, right? But at the same time, flexibilities and openness, tolerances to diversity, different research style is also needs to be considered.
Interesting. Thank you. This was interesting. Now, is there something that you say, I wish I had known this, it would save so much time and pain and agony, it would make your life easier when you were going through the PhD program or early career, before tenure?
Yes, okay. It's a little bit related to what I have started to talk about in my earlier career, but I wish I had known that there are many different paths to success in IB field. And when you're early PhD students, you see the role model. You see that, you know, the best practice of IB scholarship. You have to be good at you should be a good methodologist, and you should be a good writers, and you should be a good interviewers and data collections and analysis. You should be very logical, and you should be good at everything. But actually, it's quite difficult to do it. And especially in my case, I returned to Japan so early. So I'm not surrounded by the kind of intellectual support, which is necessary to do all kinds of, great work, like being a methodologist, being a sophisticated methodologist and theoreticians, being far away from the mainstream academic environment. It's very difficult. So I realized, well, is there something I can do instead? And I got some advice when I left INSEAD, and I said that, okay, be different. If you go back to Japan, be different. Do something only you can do, right? And maybe it's quite difficult in the short run, but in the long run, it may pay off because you're going to see the picture that many other people are not looking at. So in my case, I base myself in Japan. I look at international business world from the lens of the Japanese scholars, right? So I see different views of the IB world. So I think, it paid off. So, there's a problem. All roads lead to Rome, right? So there are multiple paths to Rome, right? So I wish I had known, because if I knew much earlier, I would have been much more relaxed about it. And I enjoyed watching different pictures.
True. Which skills or capabilities were hardest to develop, especially if you're overseas, especially, your training is the Western style, and then
Yes.
you went back, but
Yes.
You then realize that you need to develop new skill set to be successful in your new context, right?
Mm-hmm.
So which skills were harder to develop, and it took some time for you?
Okay. To me, I think it's my advice is somewhat different from those in the mainstream paradigm. But since I returned to Japan, and I've been struggling with all kinds of barriers and obstacles, and then I realized that two things that are particularly important. One is the power of networking and collaborating. And the second is focus on your strengths. Two things. Part of networking is that, I think it's very important to stay connected with all the IB communities. So I was lucky because, I was involved in multinational management project since I was PhD program. So I started presenting work with Eve and other people. So I was already insider of the network. So it was quite easy for me to enter into the AIB communities. So, but I think it's very difficult for many young students to integrate themselves into the world. So networking, especially you are located outside of the a mainstream, like a North American academic communities. I think it's very important for you to make efforts to connect yourself to the scholars in various parts of the world, networking, collaborating, find collaborators. And then, so that's why co-authoring is very important. Second thing is that in order to do that, you have to stick out in one thing rather than being good at everything. So I think that if you identify your best skills, my suggestion is to polish it, to make your best skills even greater, so that at least the people recognize you as the best in something. Even if you are located outside of the mainstream environment, if people identify you as someone who is extremely good at something, you're going to survive. You have a chance to collaborate because it's complementary, isn't it? So I think rather than trying to compensate for your weaknesses to become above average scholar, I think it's much better for you to stick with something you are already best at. I'm best at something. I want to make efforts to make my best skill even greater, to stick out. I think this is the AIB and IB world is full of talent. Everybody is talented. Nobody cares about above average scholars. So I think you've got to make yourself not above average, the distinguished scholar in something, no matter how trivial that is. So this is something I feel strongly about it, especially if you're in the foreign environment.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, look at the time. For the sake of time, last question. What's the question that I should have asked you but haven't?
Well, since I'm based in Japan, I would say anything interesting to study about Japan, because nobody's interested in Japan nowadays, right? Japan, passé. So everybody's talking about China and India and the emerging market, and nobody's sure interested in Japan. I'm committed to Japan, and Ilgas, you may feel why aren't you so, is there anything that you find it interesting to study about Japan?
Actually, yes, because my research, I'm an expert on Italian firms, and especially these heritage firms, heritage assets, heritage firms, which we call authentic firms. They have been doing the same thing for the past 600 years, and they want to excel in what they do. They produce pencil, they have the best pencil ever. And that is a passion for these people. Actually, with my co-authors, we find these authentic firms more in numbers as far as the number of distributed, more than normally distributed in a context is Japan. We have these people who make mochi. This family has been doing mochi, producing mochi for 2,000 years. And there's an interview, and he says like, oh, my grandfather's grandfather has been doing mochi, and my goal is to make the best mochi ever, to make them proud of me, and my family be proud of me. what possesses this person to perfect something that has already been perfected for a couple of centuries? This is quite fascinating, and I'm quite interested actually in so many things that are unique to Japan, especially for IB, because this is an extreme case of a great way of testing theory, all these IB theories. But yeah.
Well, I think, you should talk to Kiyohiko Ito, who works on this, a millennium company, 1,000-year-old Japanese company, how do they survive? This is a great, so Japan provides you with excellent institution environment to study longevity of companies. And my version of interest in Japan, if you ask me, is there anything interesting to study of Japan? I would say, well, actually, Japan is notoriously, known as a kind of inertia, and the lack of innovations and inertia, nowadays, and nothing changes. But because of this environmental upheavals, turmoils nowadays, I think society is just about to change. The mountain is just about to move. So, now is the time for you to look at kind of how the companies and managers break free from the inertia, how the inertia is beginning to break down. Finally, because digitalization is finally happening, right? Because of the COVID. Well, and the globalization, openness, and all kinds of diversity, finally starting to happen. So this is the right moment for you to look at Japan, how the inertia is finally beginning to break down. It hasn't broken down yet, but it's beginning. So what triggers the obstinate system to collapse and break down? So this kind of deinstitutionalization process of the inertia is worth exploring. And this is the time for you to look at Japan.
True. Innovative companies actually change the end product. The product changes, so they innovate on the product. But authentic firms actually innovate on the process, so they keep the end product the same, but the inputs are changing. So they always do experimentation. So it's actually quite challenging in this thing. I love this, and after the recording is over, we'll continue. Thank you so much. I enjoyed it a lot. I learned a lot. I'm sure the audience will agree with me. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me, August. It's a great honor. Thank you very much.
Thanks.